The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, and the ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top. The building was made to make visitors feel small, and it worked very well. Ambassador Yong-Sik walked across the marble floor, and his footsteps echoed like thunder in the massive space. 12 different alien species had sent their representatives to this meeting, and they sat in floating chairs arranged in a circle around the central platform. Each species looked different from the others. Some had scales and some had fur, and some had skin that changed colors with their moods. The Valorians were the largest of all, standing 8 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and eyes that could see. He itself, Yong-Sik, was a tall man by human standards, but here he felt like a child walking into a room full of giants. He kept his back straight and his face calm because he knew that showing fear would only make things worse. His military uniform was pressed and clean, and the medals on his chest caught the light as he walked. The reason for this meeting was simple. The outer colonies were being attacked by creatures called Void Stalkers, and these monsters had already destroyed 3 worlds and killed millions of innocent people. The Galactic Council had decided to form an elite hunting force to track down and eliminate the Stalker threat. They called it the Unified Hunting Corps, and every species wanted to be part of it. Yong-Sik stepped onto the central platform and cleared his throat. The sound was amplified throughout the chamber, and every alien eye turned to look at him. Humanity formally requests consideration for the Hunter Initiative, he announced, and his voice did not shake. Even though his heart was beating fast for a moment, there was silence. Then the laughter started. It began with the Valorians, and their mandibles clicked together in a sound that was clearly mockery. The Mintakans joined in with high-pitched squealing, and even the normally serious Drovakians made rumbling sound of amusement. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the noise of a dozen species laughing at the small human. Standing alone on the platform, High Commander Crix rose from his seat and walked toward Yong-Sik. The Valorian was massive, and his 4 arms were thick with muscle that rippled under his dark green skin. His compound eyes reflected Yong-Sik's image back at him 1,000 times. "Humans," he said, and the word dripped with contempt. "Your species has no natural weapons. You have no claws to tear flesh. You have no venom to paralyze prey. Your teeth are blunt and useless. Your hearing is mediocre at best. Your night vision is pathetic compared to worse." Crix leaned down until his face was inches from Yong-Sik, and the ambassador could smell the predator's breath. "What could you possibly hunt?" he asked. Yong-Sik did not step back, and he did not look away from the giant alien's eyes. "We hunted everything on our planet to extinction or submission," he replied calmly. "We killed the mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers and the cave bears. We hunted whales in the ocean and wolves in the mountains and eagles in the sky. There is nothing on Earth that did not learn to fear humans with tools." Another delegate called out from the circle, "Remove your technology and you are prey." The vote was called immediately, and the result was unanimous. Earth's application to join the Unified Hunting Corps was denied. Not a single species voted. In humanity's favor, Yong-Sik walked out of the chamber with his head held high, but inside he was burning with shame and anger. He had traveled for 6 months to reach this place, and he had spent years preparing for this moment, and they had laughed at him like he was nothing. The transport ship back to Earth was small and cramped, and Yong-Sik spent most of the journey staring out the window at the stars. He thought about all the humans who had died on the colony worlds that the Stalkers had attacked. He thought about the children who would never grow up, and the families that had been torn apart. And he thought about the aliens who had refused to let humanity help General He-Jin was waiting for him when he arrived. She was an older woman with silver hair cut short and practical, and her face was marked with scars from decades of combat. She had fought in 3 wars on Earth before the aliens ever made contact, and she had killed more enemies than most people had ever met. The meeting room was plain and simple with white walls and a metal table. Yong-Sik sat down heavily, and told her everything that had happened. He described the laughter and the mockery and the unanimous vote against Earth. "They think we are soft," Haijin said after he finished speaking. She was not angry, and her voice was calm and thoughtful. "They have never seen what humans can really do." She pulled up a file on the holographic display, and a photograph appeared in the air between them. It showed a woman who was small and compact, with short black hair and cold dark eyes. A jagged scar ran from her temple to her jaw, and it looked like something had tried to tear her face off and failed. "This is Staff Sergeant Ji Yeon Park Hae-jin," said her call sign is Honey Badger Young-sik, studied the photograph, and he felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in those eyes that was not quite human, something that looked hungry. "What is a honey badger?" he asked, a small animal native to Africa. And Asia Hae-jin replied, "It weighs about 25 pounds, and it attacks lions and venomous snakes and entire colonies of bees. When it is injured, it does not retreat. It becomes more aggressive. Its defining characteristic according to wildlife experts is that it does not care about anything except winning." She zoomed in on the scar on Ji Yeon's face. "She got this scar on a mission in the mountains of a classified location. An enemy combatant cut her face with a machete. She killed him with her bare hands while bleeding out, and then walked 12 miles back to base for medical treatment. The doctor said she should have died from blood loss. She told them she was too busy." The Young-sik looked at the photograph again, and he began to understand what Hae-jin was planning. "The Galactic Council thinks humans are weak," he said slowly. "Yes, they think we need our tools and our technology to be dangerous, yes, and you want to show them what a human can do without those things." Jin smiled. And it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "The galaxy is about to learn something that every creature on Earth learned thousands of years ago," she said. "There is nothing more terrifying than a human who has decided to hunt you." She closed the file, and the photograph disappeared. Contact Sergeant Park Hae-jin ordered. "Tell her I have a job for her." Young-sik nodded and stood up to leave, but he paused at the door. "What if the council refuses to accept our help even after we prove ourselves?" "They will not refuse," Hae-jin replied with absolute confidence. "When Ji Yeon is finished, the galaxy will be begging for human hunters." Young-sik walked out of the room, and he could not shake the feeling that something terrible was about to be unleashed on the universe. He had met many soldiers in his career, and he had seen many dangerous people, but something about that photograph made him feel sorry for whatever enemy Ji Yeon was about to face. The honey badger was going to hunt, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The research station Prometheus sat on the frozen surface of a moon called Kethis 7, and it was one of the most isolated places in the known galaxy. The temperature outside was cold enough to freeze blood in seconds, and the wind howled constantly. Like a dying animal, the station itself was a collection of metal buildings connected by heated tunnels, and it housed 43 scientists from 12 different species. Ji Yeon arrived on a small transport ship, and she stepped out into the airlock, carrying a single bag over her shoulder. She was smaller than everyone expected, and the alien researchers who had gathered to meet her whispered to each other in confusion. This was the hunter that Earth had sent. This tiny female with the scarred face. Station Director Tomas was an American scientist who studied alien biology, and his hands were shaking when he came forward to greet her. He was tall and thin with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he looked like he had not slept in days. "Staff Sergeant Park," he said, and his voice trembled. "Thank you for coming. We did not know who else to call." Ji Yeon looked around at the frightened faces of the researchers, and she said nothing. Her dark eyes moved from person to person, and she seemed to be measuring each one like a predator, deciding which prey was weakest. "Take me to the briefing room," she said finally. The briefing room was cold, despite the heaters running at full power. Tomas pulled up holographic images of the creature that had been attacking the station, and his hands shook so badly that he almost dropped the controller. It started 3 weeks ago, he explained. A researcher named Dr. Valkin went into the lower tunnels to collect ice samples. He never came back. We sent a search party, and they found blood but no body. Then more people started disappearing. The holographic image showed a creature that was unlike anything Ji-Yan had seen before. It was approximately 15 feet long with a body like a snake, covered in hard black plates. Multiple limbs extended from its sides, and each limb ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Its head was flat and wide with no visible eyes, but dozens of small holes that might have been sensory organs. We believe it can see in complete darkness, Tomas continued. It moves through ice like water, somehow melting through solid walls and refreezing them behind it. The Valorians sent 6 of their best hunters to track it down. What happened to them? Ji-Yan asked. They went into the lower tunnels 4 days ago. We lost contact after 72 hours. We have not heard from them since. Ji-Yan studied the holographic creature, and her face showed no fear. She had faced many dangerous things in her life, and she had learned that fear was useless. It did not help you survive, and it did not help you kill your enemy. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. She opened her bag and began laying out her equipment on the table. A combat knife with a blade that was 8 inches long and designed to punch through armor. A pistol loaded with ammunition that could pierce the hull of a spaceship. Thermal grenades that burned hot enough to melt rock. 200 feet of wire so thin it was almost invisible but strong enough to cut through bone. Stimulant pills that would keep her awake for days. Foam that would stop bleeding instantly. And a small container of red powder. What is that? Tomas asked, pointing at the powder. Capsaicin, Ji-Yan replied. It is made from the hottest peppers on Earth. Most creatures find it extremely painful. She finished packing her gear and stood up. Her bag was heavier now, but she carried it like it weighed nothing. Where's your team? Tomas asked, looking around for other soldiers. You are looking at it. Tomas stared at her, and his face went pale. You cannot go alone. That thing killed 6 Valorian hunters. They were the best in the sector. Ji-Yan looked at him with those cold, dark eyes, and she almost smiled then. They were not good enough. She walked to the airlock that led to the lower tunnels, and she did not look back. The door closed behind her, and the station fell silent for 3 days. There was no word from the tunnels. The researchers tried to contact Ji-Yan on her radio, but there was no response. Some of them thought she was dead, and Tomas began preparing her death certificate. He felt guilty because he had sent her down there alone, but he had not known what else to do. On the 4th day, the lower airlock made a sound, and everyone in the station froze. The door was cycling open, and something was coming up from below. Ji-Yan emerged from the airlock, and she was barely recognizable. Her uniform was torn and soaked with blood, both red and blue. The blue blood belonged to something else, but the red blood was hers. Her left arm hung at a wrong angle, and the bone was clearly broken. Her face was covered in cuts and bruises, and her right hand was wrapped in bloody bandages that hid the fact that she was missing 2 fingers behind her. She was dragging something massive. The head of the creature filled the entire airlock, and its dead eyes stared at nothing. Its mouth was open, and rows of teeth like daggers were visible inside it. 2 of the Valorians, Hold, Ji-Yan said, and her voice was hoarse and tired. I found their tracking beacons in its stomach. Tomas rushed forward, and he could not believe what he was seeing. This small human woman had done what 6 elite Valorian hunters could not. She had gone into the darkness alone, and she had killed a monster. Medical, he stammered. We need to get you to medical right now. After my report, Ji-Yan said. She sat down on the floor next to the severed head and pulled out a recording device. With her remaining fingers, she began documenting everything that had happened in the tunnels. How she had tracked the creature through the ice using tiny scratches on the walls. How she had set traps using the wire and waited in the freezing darkness for hours. How the creature had found her and attacked, and broken her arm in the first 30 seconds of the fight. How she had climbed onto its back and held on even as it tried to crush her against the tunnel walls. How she had finally found a weak spot in its armor and driven her knife into its brain again and again until it stopped moving. Thomas listened to the report, and he felt sick. The things she described were impossible. No one should have survived what she had survived. No one should have been able to keep fighting with those injuries. When she finished recording, Ji-Yan looked up at Thomas, and her eyes were the same cold, dark pools they had always been. Creature had a nest. She said there are eggs in the lower tunnels. I destroyed them all then. She finally allowed the medical team to take her away. News of what happened on Keda 7 spread quickly. A single human had killed a creature that had eliminated an entire Valorian hunting party, and she had done it alone in the dark with nothing but a knife and her own stubborn refusal to die. The galaxy was starting to pay attention to humanity, and somewhere in the stars, a Valorian high commander named Crix was reading the report with growing disbelief. He had laughed at the human ambassador. He had said that humans were weak and useless without their technology. He was beginning to think he had made a terrible mistake. The intelligence briefing room on the Valorian homeworld was built for giants, and the ceiling rose 30 feet above the floor. The walls were decorated with the skulls and bones of creatures that the Valorians had hunted to extinction over thousands of years. They were proud of their history as the greatest predators in the galaxy, and they had earned that title through blood and death. High Commander Crix sat at the head of a long table made from the bones of something that had once terrorized an entire star system. His forearms were folded across his massive chest, and his compound eyes glittered with anger and confusion. Around him sat his senior officers and intelligence analysts, and they were all waiting for an explanation. The holographic display showed footage from Kethis 7, and everyone in the room watched as a small human woman dragged a severed head out of an airlock. The head was larger than her entire body, and she was covered in blood, and her arm was clearly broken. But she was alive, and the creature was dead. Explain. This Crix demanded, and his voice was a low growl that made the furniture vibrate. Our warriors were the finest hunters in the sector. They had killed creatures on 100 worlds. They had never failed a mission, and this human, this tiny female, killed something that killed them all. The intelligence analyst was a Mintican named Rix, and his thin body trembled as he stood to give his report. Minticans were small and delicate creatures who served the Valorians as scientists and advisors. They were not built for combat, but they were very smart. High Commander, he began with a shaking voice. I have been researching human biology and psychology since the incident. I believe I can explain what happened. And explain. Crix snapped. Rix activated the holographic display, and images of Earth appeared in the air. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from space, but the pictures that followed were anything but peaceful. They showed ancient humans chasing massive woolly mammoths across frozen plains. They showed humans in small wooden boats throwing spears at whales the size of buildings. They showed humans tracking wolves through snow and desert and jungle. Humans have a unique hunting method called persistence hunting. Rix explained they cannot outrun their prey like Valorians can. They are slower than almost every predator on their planet, but they have an ability that no other species in the galaxy possesses. He pulled up a diagram of the human body and pointed to the skin they sweat. Rix said, this allows them to regulate their body temperature during extended physical activity. Most predators overheat after a short chase and must rest. Humans do not overheat. They can keep moving for hours, days if necessary. They simply follow their wounded prey at a steady pace, never stopping, never resting until the target collapses from exhaustion. One of the Valorian officers made a dismissive sound. They walk their prey to death. That seems inefficient. Rix nodded nervously. It does seem that way. But consider this, a wounded animal cannot escape. A wounded animal cannot hide. A wounded animal will eventually stop running, and when it does, the human will be there waiting. Crix leaned forward and his eyes narrowed. What else humans possess abnormal pain tolerance? Rix continued. The woman on Kethis 7 continued fighting with a broken arm and missing fingers. For most species, such injuries would cause immediate incapacitation. But humans can ignore pain when they decide that survival is more important. Their brains can simply choose to stop feeling it temporarily. He pulled up more images, and these showed human soldiers throughout history, men and women with terrible wounds, who were still fighting, still moving, still refusing to die. They also have something they call spike, Rick said, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. It is difficult to translate, but essentially, it means that humans will endure extreme suffering, simply to deny victory to their enemy. They will keep fighting, not because they believe they can win, but because they refuse to let their enemy have the satisfaction of killing them easily. The room was silent, and even the massive Valorian warriors seemed disturbed by this information, but she was alone. One of them said, "Finally, one human against a creature that killed 6 of us." How is that possible? Rix pulled up the file on Jiyan Park, and her photograph appeared on the display. The scar on her face seemed to glow in the holographic light, and her eyes stared out at the room with cold intensity. This human has what they call a calcine, Rix explained. It is a name given to soldiers based on their personality or abilities. Her calcine is honey badger. What is a honey badger? Crix asked. Rix changed the display, and now it showed a small furry creature from Earth. It had black and white fur and small eyes, and it weighed approximately 25 pounds. It looked harmless, almost cute. This is a honey badger, Rix said, and it is considered one of the most dangerous animals on Earth. Crix laughed. That tiny thing. The display changed again, and now it showed the honey badger attacking a lion. The small creature was biting and clawing and refusing to back down, even though the lion was 20 times its size. Another clip showed a honey badger fighting several venomous snakes and winning. Another showed one digging into a beehive and eating honey while thousands of bees stung it over and over. The honey badger has extremely thick skin that is resistant to bites and stings. Rix explained, when attacked, it becomes more aggressive, not less. It does not retreat from any threat, no matter how large. When it is hurt, it gets angry. And it does not stop until either it is dead or its enemy is dead. He turned back to the image of Jiyan human. Soldiers say that this woman has the same personality. She does not retreat. She does not surrender. She does not stop. Her file contained 17 recorded instances where medical professionals said she should have died from her injuries. She survived all of them. Crix stared at the photograph, and he thought about the day he had laughed at the human ambassador. He had called humans weak and pathetic and useless. He had mocked them in front of the entire Galactic Council. She is a monster, he said quietly. Rick shook his head, and his voice was grave. No, Commander. By our standards, all humans are monsters. They spent 10,000 years as the most successful predators on their planet. They killed everything that threatened them. They domesticated wolves and turned them into pets. They hunted whales and mammoths and bears and tigers. They drove thousands of species to extinction. They did all of this before they ever invented advanced technology. He closed the display and looked directly at Crix, laughed at them because they do not have claws or venom or natural armor. But we were wrong. They do not need those things. They are something far more dangerous. They are creatures who simply refuse to die. And when you face an enemy like that, you are not hunting them. Paused, and his voice dropped even lower. They are hunting. Crix sat in silence for a long time, and his officers waited nervously. Finally he spoke, and his voice was different now. There was no mockery in it, only respect, and perhaps a little fear. Contact the human government, he ordered. Tell them the Galactic Council wishes to discuss new terms regarding the unified hunting corps, and so began humanity rise to power in the galaxy. Not through technology or numbers or resources, but through something far more primal. The galaxy learned what Earth had always known: humans are the most dangerous predators in the universe because they never ever stop. The Void Stalkers had become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, and the destruction they caused was almost impossible to describe. 3 colony worlds had been completely destroyed, and the combined death toll was somewhere around 47 million people. The creatures attacked without warning, and they killed without mercy, and no hunting party had ever managed to stop them. The Galactic Council was desperate, and they had tried everything. They had sent Valorian hunters and Drovakian warriors and Mintaken trackers, and none of them had come back alive. The stalkers seemed to know when they were being hunted, and they would disappear into the wilderness, only to attack again. When their enemies least expected it, Ji-Yan stood in the council chamber, and she looked very different from the last time a human had stood in this place. Ambassador Young-Sik had come here in a clean uniform with medals on his chest, and he had been laughed away. Ji-Yan wore combat gear that was scarred and stained, and her own body told the story of her battles. The jagged scar on her face had faded to a thin white line, but new scars had joined it. Her missing fingers had been replaced with black polymer prosthetics that clicked softly when she moved, and she walked with a slight limp from a broken leg that had never healed quite right, but her eyes were the same, cold and dark and hungry. Behind her stood her team, and they were every bit as dangerous as she was. Sergeant Deho was the sniper of the group, and his record was legendary. He had once held a shooting position for 18 days, without sleep, waiting for his target to appear. When the target finally showed itself, Deho had made the shot from over 2 miles away. In the middle of a sandstorm, he was tall and thin, and he moved with the patience of someone who understood that time was just another. Weapon Corporal Yumbai was the medic, but that word did not really capture what she could do. She had once performed surgery on herself in a collapsed bunker, using a knife and a piece of mirror. Her hands were steady even in the worst conditions, and she knew how to keep people alive when everything was trying to kill them. She was quiet and calm, and she smiled in a way that made people nervous. Private Junho was the tracker, and he had grown up in the mountains of Korea, learning to hunt from his grandfather. He could find water in a desert by smell alone, and he could track a deer across bare rock. He noticed things that other people missed, and he never forgot a trail once he had seen it. He was young and eager, and he treated every hunt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. High Commander Crix looked down at the 4 humans, and his compound eyes reflected their images 1,000 times. He had learned respect for humans since the incident on Kethis 7, but he still had doubts. 4 humans against a stalker pack, he said, and his voice was skeptical. The creatures have killed hundreds of our best hunters. What makes you think you can succeed where so many others have failed? Ji-Yan looked up at the massive Valorian, and she did not blink. If you want to throw more bodies at the problem, be my guest, she replied. We have seen how well that has worked. Council voted, and this time the result was different. Humanity had proven itself on Kethis 7, and the galaxy was running out of options. The mission was approved, and the 4 humans were given everything they asked for: transport to the Stalker territory, weapons and supplies, a promise that no other hunting parties would interfere. They deployed to Nexus 4, which was a jungle world covered in plants so thick that sunlight never reached the ground. The Stalkers had established a nest somewhere in the deep wilderness, and they had been using this world as a base for their attacks on nearby colonies. The previous hunting parties had lasted an average of 3 days before being killed. Ji-Yan and her team lasted 6 weeks. They lived in the canopy of the massive trees, sleeping on branches and eating whatever they could catch. The jungle was full of dangerous creatures, but the humans were more dangerous, and soon the local predators learned to avoid them. Yumbai treated wounds with moss and grubs and tree sap when their medical supplies ran low. Deho set up shooting positions in the highest trees and waited for targets with endless patience. Junho mapped every trail and every track and every sign of stalker movement until he could predict where they would be before they got there. And Ji-Yan did what she did best. She hunted. Stalkers were pack hunters, and they worked together like wolves. They were smart enough to set traps and ambushes, and they communicated through some kind of telepathic connection that let them coordinate their attacks, but they had never faced anything like Ji-Yonch found the Alpha on the 23rd day of the hunt. It was a creature the size of a small building with armor plates covering its entire body. Its blood was acidic and could burn through metal in seconds, and it was the leader of the pack, which meant that killing it would throw the others into chaos. Ji-Yan began tracking the Alpha, and she did not stop for 9 days. She did not sleep. She did not rest. She survived on stimulant pills in spite and the certain knowledge that she would not die until her enemy was dead. The Alpha tried to lose her in the jungle, but she always found the trail. It tried to ambush her, but she was ready every time. It tried to outlast her, but humans do not stop on the 9th day. The Alpha was exhausted. It had not rested in over a week, because every time it stopped, the human was there, following, watching, waiting. The creature was confused because nothing had ever hunted it before. Nothing had ever refused to give up. Nothing had ever simply kept coming no matter what. The Alpha turned to face her in a clearing, and it was breathing hard. Its massive chest heaved, and its legs trembled with exhaustion. It was going to make its final stand because it had no other choice. Ji-Yan looked at the creature that had killed millions of innocent people, and she smiled. It was a small, cold smile that did not reach her eyes. "My turn," she said. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. The Alpha was bigger and stronger, and its claws could cut through steel, but it was tired and slow, and Ji-Yan was neither. She climbed its body like a mountain, and she dodged its attacks, and she found the weak points in its armor. The thermal grenades burned holes through the plates, and her knife did the rest. When it was over, Ji-Yan stood on top of the dead Alpha, and she called her team on the radio. "The Alpha is down," she reported. "Target the nest. We are ending this today." O took position in a tree overlooking the stalker nest, and he began firing. His shots were perfect, and each one killed a creature that was trying to flee. Yunbai moved through the chaos, treating wounds and keeping the team alive. Junho guided them through the jungle and made sure no stalkers escaped. By sunset, the nest was burning, and every stalker on Nexus 4 was dead. Yan collected the head of the Alpha as a trophy. It was heavy, but she carried it anyway. She wanted the galaxy to see what humans could do. She wanted them to understand that the creatures they had laughed at were the most dangerous predators in the universe. The 4 humans walked out of the jungle covered in blood and burns and bruises. They were injured and exhausted, and they looked like they had walked through hell itself. But they were alive, and their enemies were not. That was what it meant to be human. The footage was broadcast across every inhabited world in the galaxy, and billions of beings watched as 4 humans emerged from the jungle of Nexus 4. They were covered in blood, both red and blue, and their uniforms were torn and burned. Their faces were marked with exhaustion and pain, but their eyes were bright with victory. Ji-Yan walked at the front of the group, and she was dragging the severed head of the stalker Alpha behind her. The head was enormous, and it left a trail of blue blood across the ground. The creature's mouth was open, and its teeth were visible, and even in death, it looked terrifying behind the humans. The jungle was burning. The stalker nest had been completely destroyed, and the flames rose so high that they could be seen from orbit. 47 million people had died because of these creatures, and now those creatures were extinct. Galactic Council watched the footage in silence, and for once no one was laughing. High Commander Crick sat in his floating chair, and his forearms were folded across his chest. He had spent his entire life believing that Valorians were the greatest hunters in the galaxy. His species had killed more creatures than any other, and they had earned their reputation through blood and death. But now he was watching 4 humans do something that hundreds of Valorian hunters had failed to do. They had tracked the stalkers across an entire world. They had lived in conditions that would have killed most species, and they And Wan Ji-yeon was summoned to the council chamber, and she walked across the marble floor, just as Ambassador Young-sik had done months before. But this time, no one laughed at her. This time, the alien delegates watched her with something new in their eyes. It was respect and maybe a little fear. She stood at the central platform, and her team stood behind her. Daeho was leaning on his rifle because his leg had been injured in the final assault. Yunbai had bandages wrapped around her torso where a stalker claw had almost killed her. Junho was the least injured, but even he was covered in cuts and bruises. Jian looked around at the assembled delegates, and her cold, dark eyes met each of theirs in turn. She was small by the standards of this room, but no one thought she was weak anymore. Humans do not have claws, she began, and her voice was calm and steady. We do not have venom or night vision or armored skin. We cannot run as fast as Valorians or see heat like Drovakians or regenerate limbs like Mintakan. She paused, and her eyes found Crix in the crowd. We have something better, she continued. We have 10,000 years of hunting everything that ever tried to kill us and winning. We hunted mammoths with pointed sticks. We hunted whales in wooden boats. We tracked wolves across frozen tundra until they collapsed, and then we turned them into pets. We are not strong because of what we are. We are strong because of what we choose to do. She pulled a data chip from her pocket and placed it on the council table. The chip contained all the information from the Nexus 4 mission, including the locations of other possible stalker nesta creatures, biological weaknesses, and detailed analysis of their hunting patterns. The stalkers are neutralized, Ji-yeon said. Nest destroyed, breeding population eliminated. You are welcome, High Commander. Crix rose slowly from his seat, and he walked down to the central platform. His massive form towered over the small human woman, but he did not seem threatening anymore. He seemed almost humble. For a long moment, he simply stared at Ji-yeon, and his compound eyes reflected her image 1,000 times. He thought about the day he had laughed at the human ambassador. He thought about all the things he had said about humans being weak and useless. He thought about the hundreds of Valorian hunters who had died fighting the stalkers, while these 4 humans had succeeded. Then Crix did something that no Valorian had ever done for another species. He bowed. It was a deep bow that showed respect and submission, and every alien in the chamber gasped. The sound echoed through a massive room as the other delegates tried to process what they were seeing. The Galactic Council formally requests Earth participation in the Unified Hunting Corps, Crix announced, and his voice was different now. It was the voice of someone who had learned a hard lesson. We were wrong to dismiss your species. We were wrong to laugh at your ambassador. And we were wrong to think that size and strength are the only things that matter in a hunt. Ji-yeon looked at her team. Daeho gave her a quiet nod that said he would follow her anywhere. Yunbai smiled her calm, dangerous smile. Junho shrugged like it did not matter either way, because he already knew what the answer would be. We will meet full operational authority, Ji-yeon said. We do not take orders from people who do not understand how we hunt. Agreed, Crix said immediately, and better coffee. She added. Crix's mandibles clicked in what might have been confusion or amusement. Terms accepted. Back on Earth, General Haejin watched the broadcast on a screen in her office. The silver-haired woman allowed herself a rare smile as she saw the Valorian High Commander bow to her soldier. She had known what would happen when she sent Ji-yeon into the galaxy. She had known that the aliens would learn to fear and respect humanity. Her door opened and Ambassador Young-sik walked in. He had been watching the same broadcast, and his face showed a mixture of pride and disbelief. They actually bowed. He said, I never thought I would see that. Jin nodded. They learned what our ancestors learned at the dawn of time. There is nothing more dangerous than a creature that simply refuses to quit. She turned off the screen and looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere out there, her soldiers were preparing for their next hunt. There would always be another threat, and there would always be creatures that needed to be stopped, and now humanity would be there to face them. The galaxy had spent thousands of years believing that the strongest predators were the ones with the sharpest claws and the deadliest venom. They had measured danger by size and speed and natural weapons. They had been wrong. Most dangerous predator in the universe was a species that would chase you for days without stopping. A species that would keep fighting with broken bones and missing fingers. A species that would endure any amount of pain just to deny you victory. The most dangerous predator in the universe was humanity. Now the galaxy knew it. Eon stood at the viewport of her ship as it left the council world behind. The stars stretched out before her, infinite and cold and full of things waiting to be hunted. She thought about all the missions that lay ahead, and all the creatures she would face, and all the battles she would fight. Behind her, Deo was cleaning his rifle with the same endless patience he brought to everything Yumbai, was checking their medical supplies and making lists of what they needed. Junho was studying maps of their next destination and marking potential hunting grounds. They were a small team, just 4 humans, against the dangers of an entire galaxy. But they had proven that size did not matter. They had proven that humans were something special. Something that the galaxy had never seen before, something that would never ever stop. Ji-Eon smiled her cold, small smile, and she whispered words that no one else could hear. The hunt continues.